Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, August 23rd. Big week on the housing front. We had that other little event going on in Chicago, but for those of us who are entrusted with generational drop off and pickup, as I like to say, the big story of the week was back to school. And Callie, it appears that the Santa Barbara Unified School District is cracking down on student cell phone use even more than they did before. What's the story?
Yeah, so they had this policy in place called the off and away policy, where students would have to turn off their phones and put it in their backpack or have it out of sight, or some teachers employed what are called cell hotels, um, which is where, the students turn off their phone and they leave it in at like the front of the classroom in like a pocket chart or a box or a charging station or whatever. But there really wasn't any consistency with how these or like teachers' methods. But the high schools recently switched over to school-wide cell hotel. So all three high schools in every classroom now has a cell hotel for students to leave at the front of the class, and then they pick it up when they leave.
And this is both a local thing, the Teachers Association, the teachers wanted some regulation of it, but it's also, there's a push coming from the state. I guess there is state legislation allowing this, but not requiring what it is. And how much is there is there much research about how these rot the brains of students? I'll be glad to participate in that if there's not.
Um, yeah, so I do have an article coming out where I go a little bit more in depth about this. But yeah, so social media apps like Instagram or TikTok are programmed to have the same sort of chemical highs and lows to keep you hooked as a casino slot machine. So students, like, at no fault of their own, they're basically getting hooked on these apps. And,
Sorry, wait, what?
Yeah, you rock, Ryan.
uh, um,
For those of you
and
who are listening to the podcast, Ryan just pulled out his iPhone 29 or whatever it is.
He's playing
Right.
blackjack or casino games, probably
yeah,
combining both.
Go ahead, Kelly.
um, but yeah, it's also linked, like higher screen time is linked to higher rates of depression and anxiety. These these apps just have such a poor effect on students' mental health.
Yeah, I'll bet you in 10 years there's going to be like a warning on them, like with cigarettes or something. I mean, by the time we catch up with the tech industry, of course, they'll be on to AI then. It won't matter. Anyway,
I have heard murmurs that they are thinking about putting warnings on social media just because of
yeah.
how, yeah, because of how addictive and harmful it is.
No, I'm serious. I mean, it's really noticeable, like within a year or 2 years after kids get a phone, um, how it affects a lot of stuff. I mean, that's my own observation. It's just anecdotal, obviously, but
I
and then
mean, there's a reason why, they tell people to go outside and touch grass if they've been on their phone for too long.
and then Callie, despite your and Josh's best effort to stir up a teacher strike, I guess that's uh, that's all in our past, or is this going to be another rocky year, we think? What's your sense?
Um, I think that kind of sort of remains to be seen. I'm trying to talk to teachers right now to see like how they're doing, if their attitudes have changed. It was so, like hot and intense, like at the during the contract negotiations. It's hard to believe that teachers would just drop all of that, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're over it, like the contract negotiations are over and they're, leaving it in the past. But it's, having seen teachers crying during negotiations and during board meetings about like not being able to afford to live here and all that stuff. It's really hard for me to believe that they would just, be fine now, especially since they didn't get what they wanted.
Yeah, and then we talked a couple of weeks ago about your story about the job fair. They were looking for classroom assistants. Any sense of how that went? Were they able to hire any people or find enough people for that?
I'm not sure. I need to check back in on that.
All right.
I hope they did.
Yeah, and Josh, I know you've become the world's biggest apologist for Hilda Maldonado, but even though she went on your show, I wonder if you think, I mean, what's your sense of the mood of the teachers now? And did they end up running any candidates for school board or not?
I don't think they ran any candidates for school board. I think it's kind of going to be a little bit of a fizzle there. I do know Wendy Sims Moten is not running for re-election, so maybe in their mind, according to them, from their perspective, that's a win because I don't think they were very happy with the leadership, and she was board chair. There are Bill Banning is an incumbent. He is running against someone else, and I don't know if there's an affiliation between those two candidates and the school district. I think the teachers are tired, worn out. They were angry with the Hilda Maldonado interview that I did. They felt as though she was a little bit crass and tone deaf to the real issues when she said things like, "Oh, it was a playbook and we saw it coming," and then she said Hoseby Galindo is nice to her in private, but then goes out there and says mean things. So I don't think they got a sense of that she was real apologetic or remorseful. So I think it'll come up again. I think the problem with that whole situation is the union burned a lot of capital with the media, with the public, and they kind of played all their cards. And at the end of the day, they settled for what was close to the district's offer. So I don't know. I mean, these things could come up again, but it's hard to imagine them coming up in a more furious way than they did already.
Yeah. Actually, Josh, I listened to that interview and I thought it was you that was tone deaf. But anyway, put that aside. Hey,
What else is new, Jerry? At least you're saying it out loud in front of people today.
all right. All right, let's talk a little housing. Ryan, there was a big discussion at the city council this week about the La Cumbra project and trying to get what, more affordable housing or more low cost housing. What's going on there?
Yeah, the city is trying to make it to work towards a development agreement and a term sheet where they can work with the developers. You know, the developers kind of have the power in this scenario where they can go forward with the project as is, which is 642 units. And I think 52 of them, which is only about 8.5% of the total units, would be affordable. And that's pretty low. You know, our inclusionary housing is 10% at least. And a lot of people, it's really tough to get affordable apartments here in Santa Barbara. I think the majority, I think 80% last time I looked, apartments are over $2,000. So there's not a lot under that. And the city is really trying to see what can we do to work with this. This project is likely to happen. What can we do to maximize the benefit, not only in affordable housing, but Eric Friedman also says, you know, this needs to have community benefit, whether that be a satellite civic center or something where they can hold events there. There's not very many events in the northern part or event spaces on the northern part of town. But you know, this is the beginning steps of this term sheet, but the agreement would have to happen pretty fast because it's already in the process.
How much leverage does the city have on this? You know,
That's the big debate, you know. I think it's less about leverage in this situation. And in my opinion, it's the city is really trying to see if we can get the developers to show some, you know, willingness to address the housing crisis. And if that they can set example that they can do a higher percentage of affordable, then maybe other developers can try to make that pencil out too. But there's going to be a lot of debate over, you know, the big debate is what is affordable, because you say affordable housing and it's that middle moderate income, you know, those are people that make up to $214,000 a year for a household. And that's not what people think when you say affordable. So that's the big debate. And so tomorrow, Saturday, 10 a.m. there's going to be an event over there hosted by SB Neighbor Walks. I'll be there covering it. It's similar to the Three Perspectives on the Fiesta, and there's going to be Eric Friedman will be there, the developers, the Taylor family, and Rob Fredericks of the Housing Authority will all be given their 2 cents.
Oh, so there's going to be actual content to this one as opposed to the previous one.
I'm hoping it'll be, you know, more discussion and we get some idea of how these folks are feeling about it. Yeah, the last time it was kind of, let's see the plans, let's get some feedback, but it wasn't very much discussion.
And then real quick on that, what's the status of the Sears end of the mall? Is that nothing happening?
I'm not too sure about that.
Okay.
Josh, do you know? I'm not too sure.
I think that those they're separate and they're working with the developer on a application at some point to build housing, but nothing is happening right
Yeah,
now.
the
But the
Macy's
plan
one
is
is
they'll have
more-
their own housing project.
Yeah, and thanks Das Williams, who used to be a supervisor, for not getting us those two things linked together. All right, Josh, the other outrage of the week on this front is this blockbuster plan to go in on Los Olivos right near, by the way, just past the Mission, which apparently the developers are going to use a builder's remedy, right? Can you just kind of sketch out what that one's, what the conflict there is all about?
Yeah, well, the conflict is they want to build an 8 to 9 story development, 255 apartments and 436 parking spaces. So like 2 levels of parking and then the housing above it on what's a monastery, was a retreat site right next to the Mission. And so they submitted, these are the I guess it's LA County developers. Ryan wrote about these developers in an independent cover story.
Just the liposuction guy?
Well,
Yeah,
there's some affiliation. I don't know if it's exactly, but there is. Yes. The answer to that is yes. I don't know if there are other partners. So they have this big project on Grand, which is now in litigation. And now what they did was they submitted this in January, a preliminary application, and basically to lock in builder's remedy. And so now they've come back, revised it a little bit, and submitted it July 22nd. And the city is like, the city department is like, no way. This is never, we can never approve this. The public, the reaction, the homeowners are like, how are you going to build something taller than the Mission Towers right there? Even people who want more housing say that's not the best site for.
Well, and
for
not
housing.
to mention the traffic. I mean, that's a pinch point. And you know, if there's a fire or something, that one is really outrageous. What did Kristen say about it? What did the council member Sneddon say about it?
So the city is kind of walking a tightrope here because they're in litigation with this other project involving this developer. They're concerned about sort of saying the wrong thing. And again, this is an application that the city of Santa Barbara deemed incomplete. So they've sent it back and said, hey, we need real renderings. We need a traffic study. We need to know exactly your open lot area. What is your open space going to be? What is your parking configuration? And so they're deemed it incomplete. So Kristen Sneddon was slightly hesitant, but just sort of said, you know, this is a project that's going to need full extensive review and doesn't really understand how it could be built in this form, in this capacity. I reached out to the architects who designed it because
Are they local?
they're local, and they said they couldn't give me the rendering because they're revising it a little bit. The city of Santa Barbara says they can't give me the rendering because the architect technically owns it. And so unless they give their consent during like a public meeting presentation. So everyone, you know, if this rendering comes out with, and by the way, their rendering is not real. It's like a little sketch watercolor thing. So even if it comes out, it's
Fred Sweeney do that one, did he?
Sweeney did his own. Fred Sweeney did his own based off of the application.
Well,
He
he doesn't-
sketched it. And I do have that. We haven't published that because, you know, I'm sure it's great, but we don't want to mislead people into thinking that's exactly what it is.
Does
But
Fred
he did-
like the project or not?
No, Fred does not like the
Well,
project. I
then
don't know
publish
anyone who likes the
Publish it.
project. And so people are coming unglued, and what's going to happen now is the developer, LA developer, has 90 days to answer the city's questions. If they don't, then it becomes this back and forth thing. They've got to resubmit it. They don't want to lose builder's remedy. Builder's remedy essentially will tie the city's hands. and they would not have as much ability to scale the
And
project.
yeah, the thing with Builder's Remedy also is, I'm going to do the opposite of what most journalists do and kind of take it a step back. Is it's a huge project, and if it were to come across, it would be game changing. Lots of people be upset. With Builder's Remedy, nothing has come across to this formal application yet. This thing similar happened over there on Grand Avenue, where the owners put in this outside sketch of the parameters, and what they do is they lock in the parameters for a certain amount of time. And since we were out of compliance during that housing element period, and they put their pre-application during that, they say they have the right to pursue this project. But like Josh says, they haven't had this project needs to be ready to go within 5 meetings. That means the application today or 90 days from now has to be
Complete.
locked in, complete, ready for objectively checking all the boxes. And as anybody knows who's built anything in Santa Barbara, to check all those boxes and get even a streamlined objective review is going to be tough. And, I would say that it's a very uphill battle to get what they want, but legally they're setting the stage for keeping the project alive. And the Grand Avenue and this one are the example of that, is putting this application in at the time of the Builder's Remedy, even though the application is not complete, is their way of staking their ground and saying, we're going to have the right to do this project if somehow they get this plans done in 90 days. And I'm a little
You
concerned
guys
about
told me, I told you this whole thing was a scam for developers. You guys told me I was a reactionary crank. Well, this is what's
It
going
sounds
on.
more like Nick's words than ours. Okay.
All right. Hey, Callie, we were talking about Elon Musk's 27 rockets a day going up at the Coastal Commission, but there was another important issue that we didn't talk about, the new marine sanctuary. You got a piece about that that's pretty detailed with maps and everything. Now, what happened? Was this just kind of a baby step that went ahead, or where did things stand?
Yeah, so this was more of just a baby step, kind of getting that preliminary sort of okay from the Coastal Commission. They haven't even decided like what the boundaries of this thing is going to be, and they've had some problems with wind energy. They want to build wind energy leaseholders want to build turbines offshore, and they need cables to connect said turbines to the grid onshore. But those cables would run straight through sanctuary. So there's different maps and boundaries for how they want to, I guess, map this thing out. Whether they want to, exclude the section with the cables and just kind of have this like corridor where the sanctuary stops, and then or they were thinking like, oh, maybe we can exclude it for now and then grandfather in that corridor later, like once the cables are installed. So they definitely do
Who's the
have a,
decision maker on that? Is that the feds or the state?
that's the Fed. So that's NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Association.
Yeah. So, and as an environmental matter, talk about why it's important, or what's at stake.
Yeah,
Critters.
it's home to sea turtles, migratory whales. It's they kept throwing around the words biodiversity hotspot during the meeting. So yeah, there's a lot of marine life that populate there, and it's got some really unique underwater geography. And it's also very culturally important to Chumash. So that's why it's called the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, because that area of the coast was home to some of the oldest human settlements. And so it's very important to both the Chumash and the Solomon tribes.
Yeah. And how far down the track is it? And my question really is, if Trump gets elected and decides to turn the whole area over to the oil industry, I mean, can they back out of this now, or it's a done deal?
I'd say it's very close to being a done deal. closer now to the finish line than they ever have been, but they do still have a few more steps to take. I don't think I think it's too far past the point where it could just like be rewound and undone completely without, major resistance. So I think it's safe to say it'll happen.
And it's been decades since there was a marine sanctuary. Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
40 years, I think, 30 or 40 years.
yeah, well, that's
Mhm.
almost as old as me, if you can imagine that. All right, hey, Ryan, I forgot when we were talking about housing, I wanted to ask real quick, the 215 Bath project, which we've talked a lot about, you've written a lot about, it seems like that's kind of been settled out or
Well, it's far from settled, but there is a good development, and understanding that power dynamic in something like this, where the landlords usually have all the power, and usually typically a building gets bought and renovated, and the people are never heard from again. And in this case, the tenants, did not want that, and their willingness to kind of put up a fight and stay and put up that risk of putting it out there in the world, and also just putting themselves out there at fear of being evicted or going through the court cases. They're willing to do all of this. And because of that, and because of it, kind of pushed the needle towards more tenant protections, and towards having an eye on making sure people aren't doing unjust evictions. And so they did get an offer for a chance to stay for 1 year. It was offered a chance for a stay for 1 year or relocation amount of, a substantial amount. And before
I
the
think you
relocation,
said 30,000,
some
right?
of them they ranged, it depended on if they owed back rent or not, but most of them were from 30 to 40,000. And that's it's a big number to the relocation legally. What they only need to do 2 months of rent, and for them to turn that down and want to stay is big. But there's still a lot to be settled. They need to sign that, and there's some problems with that lease.
And they still have the criminal charges.
The criminal charges, of course, is a big open end. And what's going to happen with the rest of those 40 units? There's a lot of talk about student housing, and if they are able to rent a whole building to student housing, they can get a tax break from that. And there's worry if that was their plan the whole time, to buy this building and get the people paying below market rents out in favor of students that every next year can pay higher and higher market rents.
But I don't think they ever have to leave if they don't want to. Ed St. George's Beach City, there are senior citizens who still live there.
Yeah, no, but to
Yeah.
get the 100%, to get the tax break, 100% of a property, I believe, I was reading tax codes last week, as I understand, the 100% of the property has to be used for student housing to get that tax break. I could be wrong. It could be a portion or a high portion of that, but it is
But
a
the
big.
tenants can stay forever, right? I mean, if they want to, they don't have to
yeah,
take the money.
Yeah, the big they get to stay for 1 year at least. We know that. After a year, there's going to be, big questions, because these tenants staying will be paying between $1,500 and $2,000, and the new tenants would be paying upwards of $5,000-6,000 a month for the similar unit. That is a hit for these developers and landlords to take without wanting to, close that gap. So there's a danger that after a year, there's a lot of stipulation in these new lease offers that there's things about parking, there's things about them not allowed to be recording on the building, utilities, things like that change that, there's still negotiations to be had. This is far from a resolution.
All right.
And yeah, there's a lot to be happen with this still.
All right. And Josh, I'm conscientiously studying the issues in the first and District 1 and District 3 council races this weekend, because on Wednesday, your podcast and this broadcast, this global broadcast, and TV Santa Barbara are going to be in partnership and have live stream actual debates between incumbent Alejandra Gutierrez and Wendy Santamaria in District 1, and then also Oscar and his challenger in District 3. What are we looking for there?
I don't know. It hasn't even happened yet, and I think I'm over it. So
Josh does not. Josh don't put Josh down for organizing the logistics of
And
it.
don't forget, there'll be another one on September 23rd if you missed that one, hosted by The Independent.
Hey,
Oh, yeah.
put me
Well,
down for
hey, I'm pretty
organizing.
sure
Put
everything.
me down for organizing logistics if I
Well,
have
I'm saying
100%
don't do it.
control. If
Well,
I have 100% control, but if I don't,
He wants to be a dictator on day
things
one.
go haywire.
okay, Josh.
No, I
Decaf.
think that it's going to be
Decaf,
what?
Decaf.
I think it's going to be a really cool event, assuming we can pull it off. But I think we're going to be able to see Wendy Santa Maria versus Alejandra Gutierrez in District 1. And for anyone who has not heard Wendy Santa Maria, she's like amazing. Like she is such a good speaker. She is so smart. She believes these things, and she's like on a whole other level when it comes to like the intellectual dialogue and discourse when it comes to these issues. That's not to say that like I personally support her, but as an observer, it's like next level, right? And so to be able to see her is going to be
Let me say a word for Alejandra here, who I
no,
think
hold on.
pretty-
It's going to be a
pretty plugged
big
into the
opportunity
neighborhood.
for constituents to see her for the first time on that kind of a stage. Of course, incumbent Alejandra Gutierrez has her own strengths, and she's going to be able to share those and talk about her incumbency and everything that she wants to do. So it's going to be awesome to be able to see those two exchange, and answer our questions. And we're going to ask tough questions. And then obviously we've got Tony Becerra challenging incumbent Oscar Gutierrez, and that's going to be a great one too, talking about all the West Side issues. And I don't know how many forums Oscar Gutierrez has been a part of because he got elected in a special election.
Yeah, I
then he
remember
had an
that there was
opponent
that
one time.
one. The Independent did that one when there were like 4 or 5 candidates. I remember.
So it's going to be interesting to him because I don't really have a visual of what he's like in that kind of capacity. So that's going to be great. And of course, Tony's well known in the community, but that's very different than being able to communicate politically your messaging to a broader audience. So I'm looking forward to it, and I hope a lot of people check it out.
All right, and we'll have detail. I'll put details about that in the show notes. And Josh, I assume you'll have something up somewhere about it in advance, so everybody can watch the live stream on that. All right, we're almost out of time. Real quick, I thought the most baffling city council action or a non-action this week was this discussion of, hey, what should we do with all this sales tax money that we don't have yet? And according to me, aren't going to ever have, but be that as it may, what was that about? I mean, is that just like a campaign thing about what
Well-
we should prioritize or what?
So it was part of, when they put it on the ballot, they wanted to schedule a time to talk about the priorities because there was some talk about the ordering of the priorities on the ballot itself. It says 911 public safety first, housing, then homelessness. There's been a lot of talk about putting housing on the top of that. So this was the finance committee meeting that was going to discuss that. But, it was kind of a strange meeting because Alejandra and Megan were both, not supportive of the tax and kind of begrudgingly decided it's not my choice. It's up to the voters. I'll let the voters decide, which is, I really respect that on both their behalf. But they didn't feel comfortable speaking on where should this money go if I don't think we should get this money in the first place. So they kind of had a non-discussion. That discussion will continue on Tuesday with the full council, where I think we'll get a little bit more, idea of where everybody stands. I think as we talk about in Newsmakers, we talked about housing in 3 different stories. I think everything issue comes back to that. So I can see why putting that on top. There's this idea that it polled well with 911 public safety on top. So it messing with the polling, could flub up the idea that we could get over 50%.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. Kamala Harris and her acceptance speech on Thursday night talked more than I've ever recall hearing such a presidential speech talk about housing.
Yeah. And
said,
deregulating housing.
the federal government is going to solve the housing problem. Oh, okay, we'll look for that. I mean, that's talking.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting how that happens because we've seen that here in the state. Gavin Newsom promising to get this housing up online, and to do that, it's kind of opened the doors for developers and gave them a lot of power. So on the ground, it's difficult to make that work out. It is great to hear that on such a big stage, though.
Yeah, well, Gavin backed the wrong horse in this one, I'm afraid. He went out real strong for Joe Biden, and he and Kamala are ancient frenemies. So I'm sure he'll be, he'll get something if she wins, but nah, he's going to go back to the winery, Prince Gavin. All right, well, listen, Callie Fozzie, Josh Molina, Ryan P. Cruz, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time on Newsmakers.